I used to play baseball growing up, and that included playing baseball for my high school. And there's one particular guy on my baseball team that I just did not get along with, which sometimes happens on baseball teams. We weren't quite Kobe and Shaq because, neither one of us were that good, but, we didn't get along nonetheless. And I tended to sit on the bus kind of whenever we went on road games by myself. It's not that I didn't have friends on the team or didn't get along with most guys on the team. Actually, most of them I grew up playing baseball with, but I was also, if you've heard any of my story before and heard me kind of describe my adolescent experience, there's nowhere I really fit in. So, I had a whole bunch of acquaintances in school and not very many friends. All that being said, a big part of who I was also this kid of faith who was trying to be a good Christian. And so most of our contention was him picking on and teasing and messing with me. Today we would call it bullying, but back then we would just call it somebody being a jerk. But it was straight up bullying. Let's call it what it is. All that being said, I, for the most part, wouldn't react. I wouldn't respond. I would, let it go and not make a big deal about it because, here I am. I'm trying to embody Christ, my Savior. Until I didn't. And one day, we're sitting on the bus on our way to a road game, and he's just messing with me, and he's just messing with me, and he's picking with me. And all of a sudden, I just snapped. And for the next 5 minutes, I verbally tore him down to nothing. I didn't cuss. I didn't swear or use any profanity, but it was as though for the entire time we had been on the team together, I had been keeping this running list of all these little idiosyncrasies about him and all these little things, and I basically started to unleash all of those things to the point that the rest of the bus was in stitches, and even my coach was sitting there with this little grin on his face like he had it coming. But I've been a person who doesn't really struggle with anger, at least that's what I thought. And so even then, I didn't feel very good about it. This morning, I'm going to be continuing in our series that we began last week, The Places We Go. And as Sean detailed last week, this series is our own little exploration of the book, The Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection in the Language of Human Experience by Brené Brown. This week, I will be talking about the places we go when we feel wronged. In the book, Brené Brown highlights 6 different places or emotions we experience when we feel wronged: anger, contempt, disgust, dehumanization, hate, and self-righteousness. Today, I want to talk most specifically about anger. You see, for most of my life, I've had a problem with anger. Notice I didn't say I have an anger problem. I have said that I have a problem with anger. So let's go back to the beginning, shall we? The beginning of my problem with anger goes back a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You see, when I was a kid, I used to watch Star Wars: A New Hope every single weekend on VHS, which my dad had recorded off a laser disc. That's right, I'm that old. Black don't crack. I've said it before, I'll say it again. But yeah, the first time I ever saw Star Wars: A New Hope was on Laserdisc, and those things were expensive, which is probably why it didn't survive VHS, because it was a lot cheaper. I digress. But being that I am a lifelong Star Wars fan, and I'm talking whether it is the original trilogy, the prequels, the postquels, or whatever we're calling them, that just recently finished that series. I'm talking about the animated Clone Wars on Cartoon Network. I'm talking about the animated Rebels and Bad Batch series, or the Disney Plus streaming series. I'm here for it, okay? Which, side note, right now, the best television show on TV right now this year is Andor. Just telling. Yeah. I didn't hear any amens. David must not be in here. But yeah, I mean, it really is the best one out right now. I mean, if you disagree with me, come at me. Just don't choose violence. When I was a kid, Return of the Jedi was my favorite, which probably had something to do with what it was the only one to that point I had actually seen in the movie theater. But those of us who, love Star Wars, we all know that the best one is Empire Strikes Back. And I didn't really come to realize that until I actually saw it in the theater when they re-released all the original movies in 1997. And that's when I had to admit, Empire Strikes Back is the best of the bunch. So, for the rare few of you who have never seen Empire Strikes Back, which I'm not judging, so calm down. The protagonist of the film, Luke Skywalker, is seeking to complete his Jedi training, and he journeys off to the planet of Dagobah in order to find Jedi Master Yoda. Let's see how long it takes for somebody to tune out. In one exchange during his training, Yoda tells Luke, "But beware of the dark side, anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force are they." In the prequels, Yoda says it in an even more succinct and memorable way, presenting it like an equation. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Suffering leads to the dark side. You see, that was very impressionable idea for me as a kid that helped solidify the idea and belief that anger is bad. Not only is anger bad, but rarely, if ever, does anything good come from the experience of anger. So add on to Master Yoda, the other wisest person I had been exposed to was Jesus. Raised in the church, the impression I was given about Jesus when it came to anger was that Jesus was never angry. Somewhere along the way, I got the impression that anger was akin to sinning. Sure, it wasn't the same thing, but sin wasn't far behind. Sure, Jesus may have been angry a handful of times, but unlike myself, he would be completely justified in his anger and did so without sinning. Is anybody tracking with that one? Experienced that one? Okay. I brought those sentiments toward anger right into my adolescence. In my early teenage years, I would actually cry a lot. I can remember my parents getting on my case about crying a little too often, especially in disagreements and misunderstandings with my mother. They perceived that I was crying because I was being a little too sensitive. In actuality, I was angry. In some situations, I was pretty ticked off, frustrated, or even irate. But I was working really hard to suppress those feelings based upon what I understood about anger. Sometimes it became so hard and difficult, it would literally seep out of me in the form of tears. It was as if I was working so hard to be angry that I was in pain and would cry because, though frowned upon, crying would be more acceptable than being angry. Add on to that the stigma of ABMS, or angry black man syndrome, meant I understood as a token black man, one of the rules is that I don't get to be mad or angry about anything, at least not anything people deemed white aren't angry about. Even then, my anger cannot exceed theirs. I think the same can be said about women in general. I rarely, if ever, got angry, even and including when I felt like I had been wronged. I've often experienced other people being angry for me, and in some cases being upset with me that I'm not more angry about an injustice or an offense that was done to me. Kind of reminds me of what Kim said a couple of weeks ago about feeling like Judas, betraying and committing treason against oneself. Again, it's not that I never got angry, but due to my latent belief that being angry was wrong, most of my life I've been disconnected from my anger. except for brief moments like the one I described at the beginning of this talk, where all the pressure from holding and stuffing all that energy in my body would erupt like a volcano. And much like a volcano, onlookers would marvel and be in awe of what they had believed to be dormant come alive in ways they had never imagined, unless, of course, it was the person the anger was directed at. All that being said, I wouldn't have thought of myself as an angry person or a person who gets angry often. The Enneagram, maybe you've heard of it, has been a big epiphany for me. Fortunately, I was introduced to it before it became this fad where people started treating it like a parlor trick, where people would basically tell other people what their number was and rob from them the journey of self-discovery. Because that's kind of the point, not to be like, hey, look, I can pin you. No, give them the opportunity to find that out and discover it on their own. I digress, but please keep that in mind. I'm one of those people who didn't even need to take the test in order to discover my number. Upon reading in-depth descriptions of each number, I knew with certainty that I inhabit the 9. However, there was one moment in learning about the Enneagram that gave me a brief pause as to whether or not I truly inhabit the 9. It was upon learning about the triads that the numbers are grouped into, and that 9s, along with 8s and 1s, were part of the gut or anger triad. I thought to myself, wait, what? That can't be right. But upon reading and learning further, it totally made sense. You see, 8s, the challenger, as they're often known as, they wear their anger on their sleeve. You're going to know when they're angry because they are not going to hide it. 1s, which are also referred to as the reformer or perfectionist, like they're angry, but they don't have time for it yet. They're going to set it aside while they try to work things out, reform things, perfect things, and then they'll get to whatever it is that they're angry about. But 9s, such as myself, we are referred to as peacemakers, mediators. So we, as I've already described, fall asleep to our anger. We bury our anger. We suppress our anger until there is nowhere for it to go, and baboosh, there it is in all its glory for a good 5 minutes, and then it's gone. And we're sitting there left in its wake feeling awful, right? Because we're supposed to be the peacemakers. We find it not only disruptive for the people that we've directed our anger at, which is really a big part of the reason why we suppress it, because we're afraid that our anger is so wild and uncontrollable that it will just disintegrate everything in its path. But it also leaves us feeling terrible on the inside because that inner sea that we want to be even has gotten really, really choppy. But enough about the Enneagram. That's not what we're here to talk about this morning. Here's the thing. According to researchers, in her book, Brené says that anger is an emotion that we feel when something gets in the way of a desired outcome or when we believe there's a violation of the way things should be. When we feel anger, we believe that someone or something else is to blame for an unfair or unjust situation and that something can be done to resolve the problem. Anger is an action emotion. We want to do something when we feel it, and when we're on the receiving end of it, getting tongue-tied. Angry feelings can vary in intensity from mild irritation or annoyance to fury and rage. Anger is an action emotion. We want to do something. In the book, she refers to it as a full contact emotion. It activates our nervous system and can take over our brain and our bodies. There's a real need for us to learn to regulate and cope with our anger rather than, and this is the part that hit me like a ton of bricks, holding on to or expressing chronic anger, because it can take a toll both on our mental and physical health. So as someone who has mostly experienced anger by falling asleep to it, and only within the last number of years recognizing that I have a problem with anger, again, not an anger problem, I began a journey, one I'm still learning, of how to be responsibly angry. The first step in that journey was to reckon with some bad Christology in regards to whether or not Jesus ever got angry. If he had some special exemption to being angry because, he's one with God and is perfect and yada, yada, yada. So the go-to example of Jesus being angry is Jesus flipping tables in the temple. It goes a little something like this. It can be found in Matthew 21, verses 12 through 14. And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple, and he overturned the table of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you made it a den of robbers." And the blind and lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. So Matthew places the story in the beginning of Holy Week, the week that began with Jesus entering into the city of Jerusalem and ended with him being crucified. As a kid, I had always understood that Jesus was upset that money changers had basically just set up shop in God's house and turned it into a strip mall. That it would have been all right if they were doing that somewhere else, but now my understanding, with more context, I understand that Jesus would have likely done this regardless, and here's why. They were setting up, selling pigeons and other different animals that people who were journeying to Jerusalem, to the holy city, to the temple, to partake and participate in sacrificial offerings to, in their understanding, make them right with God. And it would be people from every different socioeconomic class, including the poor. And a lot of times the poor could not afford to bring their own, say, calf or one of the animals that was the, quote, prescribed or preferred animal for sacrifice. So instead, they had to bargain or barter in order to buy other animals like a pigeon that they could then use for their sacrifice. And you had money changers out there, in essence, making a profit for this system that was meant to be a way for people not to have a barrier between them and God. Instead of tearing down that barrier between them and God, it helped just upgird it even more and monetized it. And so Jesus is rightly ticked off that this is happening, but not so much because it is offensive to God, because it is God's house, but because it's offensive to the very humanity that he has incarnated the divinity and spirit of God in, that he dwelled among us as one of us. He is offended for you. He's offended for me. He is offended for humanity, and he flips the tables in his anger. His anger isn't directed at the money changers so much as it is directed at the very things that embody this injustice. He's being responsible with his anger, even in the little act that we like to say, or as the kids like to say, he's choosing Siri, not now. Lord, don't you hate it when that happens? Now I'm angry. All right, we'll have to work that out and figure that out. Anyway, all that being said, Jesus is offended for us. His anger then fueled what he did next, which was to start healing people. healing people without requiring anything of them, without perpetuating more injustice, without requiring anything's blood be shed. The second step in that journey of being responsibly angry was learning what was behind that anger. The psalmist says, "Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord." Psalm 4, verses 4 and 5. So I love that this verse, the psalmist basically gives us permission to be angry and says, in your anger, do not sin. But then he goes on to say, ponder in your own hearts on your own beds and be silent. Now that kind of, for me, almost sounds like it's like, hey, be angry, but don't make a big deal about it. But could it be that what the psalmist is saying is be angry, but take some time to sit quietly and reflect and get down to the root of what it is that is behind your anger? Oftentimes, when I'm angry, there is a lot of peripheral noise. And I need to actually allow myself to enter into what equates to a sort of silence so I can get underneath what it is that is really bothering me. In the book, they give this graph. Behind anger might be loneliness and rejection. Could be fear, and underneath that fear is anxiety, frustration, confusion, isolation, sadness, hurt, and grief, shame and guilt. Heck, I had to deal with a situation with some young people this week where one person was angry because he basically felt humiliated, and the person who did the thing that humiliated, it wasn't intentional, but then they were angry because they were feeling shame and guilt. They were feeling embarrassment. But otherwise, it was just like, oh, they disrespected me. When we were actually able to talk about it, it was like, yeah, you know what, actually, yeah, I was just a little bit embarrassed. And I just wanted the situation to go away, and that's what was fueling the anger. Overwhelming stress, helplessness, jealousy, and outrage at injustice. There's a number of things that could be behind the anger. Being able to name what is behind my anger enables me to do the third and final part of being responsibly angry. That is to allow my anger to fuel and energize me to create and cultivate good things. Perhaps my favorite quote in the entire book is this: anger is a catalyst. Holding on to it will make us exhausted and sick. Internalizing anger will take away our joy and spirit. Externalizing anger will make us less effective in our attempts to create change and forge connection. It's an emotion that we need to transform into something life-giving: courage, love, change, compassion, justice. Anger is the most compassionate response to injustice. Like, for me personally, that was huge, because as this person who has been always known as a person who's really nice, and which is true, and doesn't generally get angry, verdict's still out on that one, right? But the way I had existed in so many of the spaces that I existed in, when my anger at the injustice in the world or in our country over the last few years bubbled to the surface, all of a sudden, people did not know what to do with me. And it wasn't even that I was being irresponsible with my anger. I was just sharing why I was upset. And I was sharing what needed to be done about the injustice. And people would be like, "Cedric, you've changed. You seem to be angry." And at first, I'm like, "I'm not angry. I'm just..." And I finally said, "No, you know what? Yeah, I'm angry. I'm mad as hell. And I'm allowed to be angry, because this is something worth being angry about." And there was compassion behind that anger of not just like, this is screwed up, let's burn everything down, but like, let's make it better. Let's resolve it. Let's work to fix this. Let's put things to right. Much like Jesus doesn't stop at flipping the tables, he goes out and he heals people. That's what I want my anger to be and lead to. So, in closing, I share this verse with you, and I hope it's not too triggering. Ephesians 4:26-27. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. First, as we've already said, be angry. Allow yourself to feel it and call it what it is. So often, the do not let the sun go down on your anger has been weaponized in relationships, especially in marriages, to force folks who aren't ready or still processing to immediately reconcile and get over it. That is not what this is about. Could it be that the idea of not letting the sun go down on your anger is basically saying resist being perpetually angry? Resist being angry all the time, from one sun up to sundown to sun up to sundown, and so on and so forth. But then also, it says, and do not give opportunity to the devil. Which I'm tempted to make a Halloween joke, but it's going to fall flat. It's All Hallows Eve, celebration of the saints, not all that devil stuff. Anyway, another part of my evangelical past, sorry. The word devil, the name Satan, it's often actually translated into sometimes accuser, but also deceiver. And one of the ways that it can oftentimes be deceived is we are deceived. Let me just say it this way. Beware of being deceived into internalizing your anger and letting it morph into contempt. Beware of being deceived into externalizing your anger and letting it transform into self-righteousness. The kind of self-righteousness that positions you callously above the offense, infraction, or injustice and unwilling to bring your self-proclaimed brand of goodness into it. That is simply happy to be better. I don't know where you all are at in your own personal journey with that emotion of anger, or more specifically, where you go to when you feel wronged. Right now, we oftentimes have to navigate negotiating whether or not we even have the right to be offended. And even then, so much energy is expended in negotiating that oftentimes we are left exhausted and unable to actually allow that anger, that emotion, to be the fuel that energizes us into whether it be reconciliation, whether it be restoration, whether it be just creating good things that resolve that issue, or cultivating more good things. But at the end of the day, it just simply starts with calling it what it is. Getting underneath what is at the source of that. So then we can be galvanized into doing something productive and life-giving about it. So, Watershed community, as you go into your day, as you go into your week, may you know that the divine has given you permission to be angry. May you not stay angry forever, but may you also go and flip the tables that need to be flipped, but also seek to be healed and heal others. Amen? Amen.